The medical bay smelled of antiseptic and recycled air, sterile white walls reflecting the harsh overhead lights. Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen sat on the examination table, her uniform jacket folded neatly beside her, while Admiral Marcus Webb stood with his arms crossed, his weathered face set in the stern expression that had intimidated countless officers throughout his 30-year career. "You're refusing medical leave?" His voice carried the weight of authority that came from commanding an entire fleet. "Commander, you took shrapnel to the ribs during the boarding action. The ship's doctor recommends 3 weeks of recovery." Sarah's jaw tightened. "With respect, Admiral, we're 2 days from the Kepler station negotiations. I'm the only one on this ship who speaks Centauri fluently. You need me there." "What I need," Webb said, his tone hardening, "is officers who follow medical protocols. You're no good to me if you collapse during a diplomatic summit because you're too stubborn to." "I'm fine." She cut him off, immediately regretting the breach in protocol. But something in his dismissive tone had struck a nerve deeper than the shrapnel wound. "Sir," she added belatedly. The Admiral's eyes narrowed. In the 15 months Sarah had served aboard the Constellation, she'd been nothing but exemplary, professional, composed, brilliant. This flash of defiance was new, and it intrigued him as much as it irritated him. "You're not fine," he said, moderating his tone slightly. "The medical report shows significant trauma. I've seen combat injuries before, Commander. I know when someone is pushing themselves beyond safe limits." Sarah's hands clenched on the edge of the examination table. The wound in her side throbbed with each breath, a sharp reminder that he was right. But she'd endured worse. Much worse. "Permission to speak freely, sir?" Webb studied her for a long moment, then nodded once. Sarah stood, her movements careful despite her best efforts to appear unaffected. "You want to know why I'm refusing medical leave? You want to understand why a minor shrapnel wound isn't enough to keep me off duty?" Before the Admiral could respond, she reached for the hem of her standard-issue undershirt and lifted it, revealing not just the fresh bandage over her left ribs, but the landscape of old scars that crisscrossed her torso. Admiral Webb's stern expression faltered. His lips parted as if to speak, but no words came. He'd seen combat injuries throughout his career, had visited countless wounded in medical bays across a dozen worlds. But this was different. These weren't the clean lines of surgical scars or the random patterns of battlefield wounds. These were deliberate, systematic, methodical. The scars ran in parallel lines along her ribs, some thin as paper cuts, others thick and raised. They wrapped around her sides, disappearing beneath the bandage and reappearing above it. The pattern spoke of prolonged suffering, of wounds inflicted over time. The Admiral's trained eye could identify at least 3 distinct periods of injury, healed at different stages. The oldest scars were faded, pale silver against her skin. The newest, apart from the fresh wound, were still pink and raised. "These," Sarah said quietly, her voice steady despite the vulnerability of the moment, "are from the Titan labor camps. I spent 18 months there after my transport was captured during the initial invasion of the outer colonies. I was 23 years old." Webb's face had gone pale. The Titan camps were legendary for their brutality, but they'd been liberated 7 years ago. Most of what the public knew had been sanitized for official reports. The reality had been deemed too disturbing for general consumption. "The guards had a system," she continued, her tone almost clinical, as if she were delivering a tactical briefing rather than recounting her own torture. "Every time someone in your work unit failed to meet quota, everyone received punishment. They preferred ribs because the injuries were painful enough to be effective, but not so severe that they'd kill us outright. They needed us functional. Barely." She lowered her shirt slowly, maintaining eye contact with the Admiral. "I learned something in those camps, sir. I learned the difference between pain that matters and pain that doesn't. I learned that your body can endure far more than your mind believes possible. And I learned that the mission, keeping yourself and your people alive, doesn't stop just because you're hurting." Admiral Webb finally found his voice, though it came out rougher than intended. "Commander, I didn't know you'd been in the camps. It's not in your service record." "I requested it be sealed," Sarah said, settling back onto the examination table with a barely suppressed wince. "I didn't want to be defined by it. I didn't want every superior officer I served under to look at me and see a victim instead of a capable officer." The Admiral moved to the chair across from her, sitting down heavily. The authority figure had given way to something more human, more uncertain. "How did you?" He paused, choosing his words carefully. "How did you survive? How did you come back from that and become one of the finest officers in the fleet?" A ghost of a smile crossed Sarah's face. You learn to compartmentalize, sir. You learn that survival isn't about being unbroken, it's about being functional despite the breaking. Every day in that camp, I promised myself that if I made it out, I would never waste the second chance. Never let pain be an excuse. Never let fear win. She gestured toward the bandage on her side. This shrapnel wound? It's nothing, Admiral. It hurts, yes, but it's not threatening my life or my ability to perform my duties. I've translated diplomatic documents with cracked ribs before. I've run combat drills with injuries worse than this. Not because I'm trying to be a hero, but because I know my limits better than any medical scanner. Webb leaned forward, resting his elbows on his knees. The doctor's protocols exist for a reason, Commander. I know, sir. And under normal circumstances I'd follow them. But these aren't normal circumstances. The Centauri delegation has been skeptical of our intentions from the start. Ambassador Chen, no relation, barely managed to get them to the table. If I'm not there, if we have to rely on translation software or the junior linguist who's only been studying Centauri for 6 months, we risk offending them. We risk losing an alliance that could change the balance of power in 3 sectors. The Admiral was quiet for a long moment, studying this officer he'd thought he knew. He'd read her performance reviews, watched her work, admired her competence. But he'd never imagined the steel that had been forged in such terrible fires. You're putting the mission above your well-being, he said finally. I'm putting the mission above my comfort, she corrected. There's a difference, sir. I know when I'm compromised. I know when I need help. This isn't one of those times. Webb stood, his expression unreadable. If you collapse during those negotiations. I won't. If your injury worsens. I'll report it immediately. He studied her face, seeing not defiance now but absolute certainty. This wasn't recklessness or bravado. This was an officer who genuinely understood her own capabilities, who had learned them in the hardest school imaginable. You'll check in with medical daily, he said finally. Non-negotiable. And at the first sign that you're not managing, you step back. Understood. Sarah stood as well, coming to attention despite the pain it caused. Yes, sir. Thank you, sir. Admiral Webb paused at the door, turning back to face her. Commander Chen? What you survived, what you endured, that does define you whether you want it to or not. But not the way you fear. It doesn't make you a victim. It makes you one of the strongest people I've ever had the privilege to command. For the first time since entering the medical bay, Sarah's composure cracked slightly. Her eyes glistened, though no tears fell. Thank you, Admiral. That means more than you know. After he left, Sarah sat back down on the examination table, allowing herself a moment of weakness now that she was alone. The wound in her side throbbed, and the old scars seemed to ache in sympathy. She placed her hand gently over the bandage, feeling the rapid beat of her heart beneath damaged ribs that had been broken and healed more times than she cared to count. She thought of the young woman she'd been before the camps, naive and idealistic, believing that heroism was about grand gestures and fearless courage. She thought of who she'd become, someone who understood that true strength wasn't about being unbreakable, but about continuing to function even when broken. 2 days later, when the Centauri delegation arrived at Kepler Station and the negotiations began, Lieutenant Commander Sarah Chen stood beside Admiral Webb, translating with flawless precision. Her side ached with every breath, but her voice never wavered. The Admiral glanced at her periodically throughout the 12-hour session, seeing her not with pity but with respect. And when the Centauri finally agreed to the alliance terms, when the treaty was signed that would protect millions of lives across the outer colonies, Admiral Webb knew that it was only possible because one officer had understood the difference between pain that matters and pain that doesn't, and had learned that lesson in the cruelest classroom imaginable. The scars remained as scars do. But they were no longer wounds. They were proof of survival, evidence of strength, and a reminder that sometimes the greatest courage is simply choosing to stand up one more time.